There is a pattern that keeps repeating itself quietly across friendships, relationships, and even brief encounters that feel far more intense than they should. An INFJ walks into a room, reserved, observant, almost invisible at first glance. An ENTP enters the same space, energetic, curious, effortlessly drawing attention without even trying. On the surface, they seem like complete opposites. One is deeply introspective, emotionally complex, and protective of their inner world. The other is fast-thinking, playful, intellectually restless, and thrives on external stimulation. And yet, again and again, these two types find each other. Why does this happen so often? Why do INFJs, known for their emotional depth and selectiveness, consistently feel drawn toward ENTPs, who often appear unpredictable and even chaotic? The answer is not random. It is rooted in cognitive psychology, emotional wiring, and one of the most fascinating dynamics in personality theory: complementary opposites. INFJs operate primarily through what psychologists refer to as introverted intuition. This means they are constantly searching for meaning beneath the surface. They are not interested in what is obvious. They want to understand patterns, hidden motives, and the deeper story behind everything. Their secondary function, extrovert feeling, makes them highly attuned to emotions, both their own and others. They feel deeply, often more than they show, and they crave authentic connection that goes beyond superficial interaction. ENTPs, on the other hand, are driven by extrovert intuition. Instead of going inward to find meaning, they explore outward possibilities. They see connections everywhere, generate ideas rapidly, and challenge assumptions constantly. Their secondary function, introverted thinking, gives them a sharp analytical edge. They question everything, including social norms, emotional expectations, and even the logic behind their own beliefs. At first glance, this seems like a mismatch. One is emotionally driven, the other intellectually driven. One seeks depth and stability, the other seeks novelty and change. But this contrast is exactly where the attraction begins. Research in psychology consistently shows that humans are often drawn to traits they feel they lack but unconsciously desire. A 2016 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals are more likely to feel attracted to partners who possess complementary traits that balance their own psychological tendencies. This is not about opposites clashing. It is about opposites completing each other. For an INFJ, the ENTP represents something incredibly rare, someone who can match their intuitive depth but express it outwardly with confidence and spontaneity. ENTPs do not just think deeply. They verbalize it, play with it, and challenge it in real time. For an INFJ, who often keeps their insights internal, this is both fascinating and liberating. The ENTP, in turn, experiences something equally powerful. INFJs offer emotional grounding that ENTPs often lack. While ENTPs can analyze emotions intellectually, they do not always feel them with the same depth or clarity. INFJs bring a sense of emotional intelligence that feels stabilizing, almost like discovering a language they have always heard but never fully understood. But the attraction goes deeper than cognitive functions. It touches something more primal, the human desire to be seen. INFJs spend much of their lives feeling misunderstood. Their inner world is complex, layered, and difficult to explain. Many people only see a fraction of who they are. ENTPs, however, have a unique ability to explore ideas without judgment. They ask questions others would never think to ask. They challenge assumptions. They dig deeper, not emotionally at first, but intellectually. And in doing so, they often uncover parts of the INFJ that no one else has ever noticed. For the INFJ, this feels like recognition. Not superficial attention, but genuine curiosity about who they truly are. At the same time, ENTPs are rarely fully understood either. Their constant idea generation, their tendency to debate, their unpredictable nature can make others see them as inconsistent, or even unreliable. INFJs, however, look beyond that surface. They sense the underlying patterns, the intentions, the meaning behind the chaos. They do not just hear what the ENTP says. They understand why they say it. And in that moment, something powerful happens. both feel seen in a way they rarely experience. This is where the connection begins. Not with attraction in the traditional sense, but with recognition. A quiet realization that this person understands something others do not. And once that door opens, it becomes very difficult to close. What begins as curiosity between an INFJ and an ENTP rarely stays at that level for long. Something shifts. Conversations become longer, deeper, more charged with meaning. Time seems to disappear when they interact. And what initially felt like simple interest starts evolving into something far more intense, almost addictive in nature. This is not coincidence. It is the result of a specific kind of cognitive chemistry that few personality pairings experience as strongly. At the core of this dynamic lies a powerful neurological mechanism, the brain's response to novelty combined with emotional validation. When these two elements are present at the same time, the brain releases higher levels of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation, reward, and desire. Studies in neuroscience have shown that unpredictable yet meaningful interactions stimulate the brain more intensely than predictable ones. This is exactly what happens when INFJs and ENTPs connect. For the INFJ, the ENTP is a constant source of intellectual novelty. ENTPs rarely think in straight lines. Their ideas branch, evolve, and transform mid-conversation. They jump between concepts, challenge assumptions, and introduce perspectives that the INFJ may have sensed intuitively but never articulated. This creates a sense of expansion in the INFJ's mind. It feels like their internal world is suddenly being externalized and explored in real time. But what makes this even more powerful is that ENTPs are not just random thinkers. They are pattern recognizers in their own way. They pick up on subtle inconsistencies, contradictions, and hidden possibilities. When they engage with an INFJ, they often begin dissecting the INFJ's thoughts, asking questions that go deeper and deeper. And without realizing it, they create a space where the INFJ feels intellectually understood at a level that is extremely rare. This combination of novelty and recognition triggers a strong psychological response. The INFJ begins to associate the ENTP with mental stimulation, discovery, and emotional resonance. Over time, this association strengthens, turning simple attraction into a form of cognitive attachment. For the ENTP, the experience is equally compelling but for different reasons. INFJs provide something that ENTPs often lack in their daily interactions: depth with emotional coherence. ENTPs are used to exploring ideas, but many people cannot keep up with them or engage at the same level. Conversations often remain surface level or become purely logical debates. With an INFJ, however, the interaction takes on a different quality. INFJs do not just respond to ideas. They interpret them, connect them to meaning, and reflect them back with emotional insight. This creates a feedback loop that ENTPs find deeply satisfying. It is not just about being understood intellectually. It is about having their ideas transformed into something more meaningful than they originally appeared. This dynamic activates what psychologists call reciprocal validation. Each person is reinforcing the other's core identity. The INFJ feels seen for their depth. The ENTP feels valued for their intellect. And because both experiences are relatively rare in their lives, the intensity of the connection increases rapidly. There is also an element of unpredictability that amplifies this effect. ENTPs are naturally inconsistent in their behavior. They may be intensely engaged one moment and distant the next, not out of malice, but because their attention is constantly shifting toward new stimuli. For the INFJ, this unpredictability can create a powerful emotional loop. When the ENTP is present, the connection feels extraordinary. When they pull away, the absence feels significant. Psychological research on intermittent reinforcement shows that unpredictable rewards create stronger attachments than consistent ones. This is the same principle behind addictive behaviors. The uncertainty of when the next meaningful interaction will occur makes each interaction feel more valuable. For the INFJ, this can deepen their emotional investment, sometimes beyond what they initially intended. At the same time, INFJs introduce a different kind of unpredictability for ENTPs. While ENTPs are externally expressive, INFJs are selective in what they reveal. They do not open up easily, and when they do, it happens in layers. This creates a sense of mystery that ENTPs find incredibly engaging. Each new insight into the INFJ feels like uncovering something rare and valuable. This mutual sense of discovery keeps both individuals engaged far longer than they might expect. Conversations evolve into late-night discussions. Ideas turn into shared perspectives. And what started as curiosity becomes something that feels almost impossible to walk away from. But this intensity comes with a hidden cost. Because the connection is built on stimulation, depth, and unpredictability, it can blur the line between genuine compatibility and psychological dependency. What feels like perfect understanding may, in some cases, be a reflection of how powerfully each person is activating the other's cognitive and emotional systems. And this raises a critical question. Is this connection sustainable, or is it simply too intense to last? At a certain point, the connection between an INFJ and an ENTP stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like fate. There is a subtle but powerful shift where both individuals begin to believe that what they are experiencing is rare, almost too precise to be accidental. The conversations feel too aligned, the understanding too deep, the timing too perfect. It creates the illusion of inevitability, as if they were always meant to meet. This feeling is not just emotional. It is cognitive. The human brain is wired to search for patterns and assign meaning to them. When two people repeatedly experience moments of intense resonance, the brain begins to interpret this as significance rather than chance. Psychologists refer to this as apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated events. In relationships like this, however, the connections are not entirely random. They are built on real compatibility in perception, thinking, and emotional processing. That makes the illusion of destiny even more convincing. For the INFJ, this experience can feel almost overwhelming. INFJs are naturally inclined toward long-term vision and emotional commitment. When they encounter someone who seems to understand them deeply and challenge them intellectually, they begin to imagine what this connection could become. Their intuition starts projecting forward, building a narrative of potential. It is not just about what is happening in the present. It is about what this could mean for the future. The ENTP, meanwhile, experiences something slightly different but equally intense. They are drawn to the INFJ's depth, but more importantly, they are intrigued by the INFJ's ability to see through them. ENTPs often operate in environments where they can adapt, improvise, and shift perspectives quickly. Few people take the time to truly understand the patterns behind their behavior. When an INFJ does, it creates a sense of being intellectually and psychologically exposed in a way that is both exciting and unsettling. This combination creates a powerful emotional loop. The INFJ feels chosen. The ENTP feels understood. And together they begin to build a shared reality that feels more meaningful than their individual experiences. But this is where the dynamic begins to reveal its darker side. The very traits that create the initial attraction can also become sources of tension. INFJs seek emotional consistency. They want depth, but they also want stability. They invest slowly, but once they do, their commitment is profound. ENTPs, however, are driven by exploration. They thrive on change, new ideas, and shifting perspectives. What feels like freedom to the ENTP can feel like instability to the INFJ. Over time, this difference begins to surface in subtle ways. The INFJ may start seeking reassurance, not necessarily through words, but through consistency in behavior. They want to feel that the connection is not just intense, but reliable. The ENTP, on the other hand, may resist anything that feels like limitation. They do not intend to create insecurity, but their natural inclination toward novelty can make them seem emotionally unpredictable. This creates a tension that is difficult to resolve because both individuals are acting according to their core psychological wiring. Research in attachment theory provides insight into this dynamic. INFJs often display traits associated with anxious, preoccupied attachment when they feel deeply connected. They become more sensitive to changes in emotional availability. ENTPs, in contrast, may exhibit avoidant tendencies under pressure, especially when they perceive expectations that limit their autonomy. This combination is known to create a push-pull dynamic, where one person seeks closeness while the other seeks space. And yet, despite this tension, either wants to let go. Why? Because the connection itself is unlike anything they have experienced before. The INFJ struggles to find someone who can match both their emotional depth and intellectual curiosity. The ENTP struggles to find someone who can engage with their ideas while also understanding the emotional meaning behind them. When they find each other, it feels rare, almost irreplaceable. This scarcity intensifies the bond. It creates a belief that walking away would mean losing something that cannot be found again. But this belief can also trap both individuals in a cycle where they hold on not because the relationship is healthy, but because it feels unique. And this is the paradox at the heart of the INFJ and ENTP connection. It can feel like destiny, but it can also become a source of emotional conflict that neither fully understands how to resolve. The question is no longer why they are drawn to each other. That part is clear. The real question is whether this connection can evolve into something stable, or whether it is destined to remain intense but fragile. The truth that most people do not want to hear is this: intensity is not the same as compatibility. Just because a connection feels rare, deep, and almost fated does not mean it is naturally sustainable. What INFJs and ENTPs experience together is powerful, but without awareness, that same power can slowly destabilize the relationship instead of strengthening it. The difference between a connection that lasts and one that collapses lies in whether both individuals can move beyond instinct and begin to understand the mechanics of what is happening between them. For the INFJ, the first shift begins with recognizing that not every moment of emotional inconsistency is a sign of rejection. ENTPs are not wired to maintain constant emotional presence. Their attention moves, their focus shifts, and their energy fluctuates depending on what stimulates their curiosity. Interpreting this as a lack of care creates a narrative that is not entirely accurate. Psychological studies on cognitive styles show that individuals high in novelty-seeking behavior often display irregular engagement patterns, not because they value people less, but because their brains are constantly scanning for new input. Understanding this does not mean tolerating neglect. It means separating intention from behavior. When INFJs stop personalizing every shift in the ENTP's attention, they regain emotional stability. They begin to respond instead of react. And this alone can change the entire dynamic. At the same time, ENTPs must confront a truth that is equally important. Depth requires consistency. While spontaneity and intellectual exploration are part of their identity, relationships built on emotional connection cannot survive on stimulation alone. Research in relationship psychology consistently shows that long-term satisfaction is strongly linked to predictability and emotional availability. This does not mean losing freedom. It means creating small, consistent signals that communicate presence and reliability. When ENTPs learn to anchor their behavior in moments of intentional consistency, something shifts in the INFJ. The anxiety that once drove the push-pull dynamic begins to fade. The INFJ no longer feels the need to chase reassurance, and instead, the connection becomes more grounded, more stable, and paradoxically, more free. There is also a deeper layer that both must understand. The attraction between them is not just about who the other person is. It is about what the other person represents. For the INFJ, the ENTP represents expansion, freedom of thought, and the courage to express ideas without fear. For the ENTP, the INFJ represents depth, emotional meaning, and the ability to connect ideas to something that truly matters. When they come together, they are not just interacting with another person. They are interacting with parts of themselves that have been underdeveloped. This is why the connection feels transformative. It is not just about love. It is about growth. But growth only happens when both individuals are willing to integrate what they learn from each other, rather than depend on the other person to provide it. If the INFJ relies on the ENTP to feel intellectually alive, or the ENTP relies on the INFJ to feel emotionally grounded, the relationship becomes a dependency. And dependency, no matter how intense it feels, is not sustainable. However, When both individuals begin to internalize these qualities, something extraordinary happens. The INFJ becomes more expressive, more open to exploration, less afraid of uncertainty. The ENTP becomes more grounded, more aware of emotional impact, more capable of depth beyond logic. At that point, the relationship is no longer based on filling gaps. It becomes a partnership between two people who are evolving together. And if that evolution does not happen, then the most powerful decision they can make is to let go. Walking away from a connection like this is not easy. It feels like leaving behind something rare, something that may never happen again. But psychology teaches us that rarity does not equal rightness. A connection can be unique and still not be healthy. It can be intense and still not be sustainable. The real measure of a relationship is not how strongly it begins, but how well it supports who you are becoming. In the end, the INFJ and ENTP dynamic is not a story about perfect compatibility. It is a story about potential. The potential to understand, to grow, to transform. And sometimes, the potential to realize that even the most extraordinary connections are not meant to last forever. But whether they stay or walk away, one thing remains true. They will never forget each other. Because some connections do not just pass through your life. They change the way you see it forever.